from black box to glass box learning. And we have a distinguished speaker, Amar, from IBM Research, who will be sharing his expertise and his knowledge with you guys. So without wasting any more time, I'll just hand it over to Amar.
Thank you so much. Can everyone hear me okay? So welcome to our MIT and IBM party. This is the second time we held it. I actually joined IBM just before the first one, and it was an exciting time. So as mentioned, please go upstairs, look around. There'll be lots of demos going on. They're on the 5th floor. You can interact with other MIT alums and be able to learn more about IBM. So I've come in. I'm here based in Cambridge, and I built out a team with a primary focus of understanding how to evaluate AI within the healthcare space. And as some of you may know, we also, in addition to having this party, have launched this new MIT IBM Watson AI Lab. It's a mouthful, the Watson AI Lab, where we're going to be focusing on primarily two industries, healthcare and security, both of which have their headquarters here. So this is a great opportunity for us in research, who's also located in this building, to work with MIT faculty, with MIT students, to start looking at the next generation of AI in these two industries. And in particular, with healthcare, there's some of the complexities that we have, why we have a specific application area, is the kind of data that we're getting in healthcare. So clearly, as more electronic health records are getting digitized, we have data coming in from point of care. We also have an increasing number of data coming in from genomics, genetics, other biomarkers. We have data coming in from imaging, physiologic data that's increasingly taken at home. So things that people are doing are having their IoT devices at home. They can collect their blood pressure measurements. We get data through lifestyle, the social interactions and behavior. So a wide variety of data around in the healthcare space and life science space. And as shown in this model, our goal is to think about different ways we can utilize this complex data. First of all, we can look at the temporality of the data. We can look at how, in this case, diseases are progressing through data that we've collected here. We can look at network information within the data. We have a lot of work going on in similarity, looking at how two patients are similar, so we can create cohorts of similar patients for analysis. And then the integration of data across for a single patient. We have a number of sort of the newest of the AI algorithms that we're applying, transfer learning, looking at how we build models with one data set and transferring to another data set, one-shot learning. I won't go to all these details, but these are the different types of learning algorithms. Again, the work that we're doing now for this 10-year initiative with MIT is to work together closely with the MIT faculty and students to start thinking about the next set of AI algorithms in this space. And of course, very important for us in the medical domain is that we have a lot of background knowledge that are incorporated through guidelines, that are incorporated through institutional policies, mentioned literature, and so there's a lot of work in just trying to bring out this unstructured information that already exists and trying to understand how to apply it within the healthcare space. Some highlights of projects that we've been working on within IBM Research are 4 examples here. One is the work going on in real-world evidence. So we're looking at taking data that's being collected through electronic health record systems and through claims data, medical claims data, and trying to understand the longitudinal nature of the data itself, building that. As part of working with Watson Health, our separate business units based here, we have access to data through Truven Explorers, which contain 60 million patient records as part of that. So we have a large number of data points at this point. And we're looking at things as trying to understand how this particular patient is going to progress. We can look at this data set and learn from the data set combined with the prior medical knowledge to predict for the physician how the patient will do. We're working on a project called the Medical Seed. This is one of our what we call grand challenges within IBM. So some previous grand challenge you may know about was Jeopardy. We create Watson for Jeopardy. Here we're trying to create basically a cognitive assistant for radiologists who have to sort through large volumes of images as well as understand the patient through information that's recorded within the electronic medical record. And so this is a fairly tedious task, as you imagine, trying to go through all this foraging for information, looking at large amounts of volume. And we know that the machine, in this case, can be able to detect certain patterns that the radiologist may miss, or find findings in the notes that the radiologist may miss. The goal is to surface this information to help with the diagnostic process. We're also doing work in genomics. We're working closely with the Broad Institute. We have an initiative to take cancer cell lines for patients who have failed their current therapies, and we want to be able to understand for those kinds of treatment-resistant cancers what are the things that we can offer the patient? What are other treatments that we can offer? And that can be based on the chemical nature of the drugs that we have available. It can be based on information from literature. So we're working on bringing this information to the point of care. And as well as this personalized system of insights. We have a lot of work on collecting data from mobile devices, IoT, and trying to figure out how to create a comprehensive view of the patient. One of the projects we have going on this place is working with Pfizer, who is part of the Blue Sky project, where we're looking at how patients with Parkinson's disease do at home. So patients normally with any condition, if they want to be evaluated, they have to come and see the physician. And the physician normally does a simple test, a number of questions, and they get a one-time assessment of the patient. But if we have IoT and wearable devices, we can get a fuller picture of how the patient's doing at home, how hard is it for them to get out of bed, how hard is it for them to go and cook. And we want to use that information from these home devices to get a more comprehensive view of the patients. Pfizer's prestigious this because as they're developing new drugs for Parkinson's disease, they want to use the Internet of Things IoT environment to be able to determine how well they're doing at home and to help the clinician assess that information as well. So these are sort of the 4 initiatives we have going on. We're launching more, again, as part of our lab efforts here and globally. And so the whole idea is to bring this knowledge that we're going to acquire through AI to the point of care so they can help physicians and patients make better decisions. And the question really is, given where we're at right now, are we ready to deliver? Are we going to be able to trust the systems that we're building so that they can deliver it into healthcare environment? Just think of the complexity. This is not about having an accurate Siri, Alexa. This is about making life or death decisions for patients. So are we ready to do this? And I would say we're not there quite yet in the current models, and we need to think about how we can go to the next stage. So what we do currently, the current AI, we bring all this data together as much as we can. The data itself has problems. There's missing information in the data. There's things where, if we just look at a single hospital, for example, patients, if we try to learn from a single hospital's data set, we may have problems because the patient may have gone to another hospital, and so that information may be missing. So how do we deal with the missing information? Some of these measurements that we take are uncertain, they're not precise. How do we deal with those issues here? Of course, integrating the data provides us one solution of this, and tying that into some of the prior medical knowledge helps us build better models. Then we deliver this information to the physician, and the physician gets this information, decides what to do with this information. So one big problem is that if the system is wrong, right, what is the physician supposed to do? They can just ignore the data, information that we give them. But we ideally would like to be able to have them interact back with the system and say, look, this information that you've classified this patient is incorrect. We would like to start thinking about how we build algorithms in the middle that learn back from the user what the right things are to do. Now, this is not an easy task to begin with. If you bring 3 radiologists or 3 ophthalmologists or 3 any of the physicians into a room and you give them a case, there's no guarantee that they're going to come up with the same answer, first of all. So there's a disagreement among clinical experts about how to interpret complex data. So when we think about interaction back to the system, it has to be able to understand that each clinician may have a different perspective on this. There's no clear gold standard in many situations in clinical care. The other thing is that physicians are not completely logical. They're not machines themselves, so they may have biases about how they make decisions. So, for example, it's often common that when a physician leaves their residency, they're done with their training, that their index of what they think is the right things to do is based on when they left. So the kinds of drugs they feel comfortable prescribing are often the kinds of drugs they were using when they left residency. Over time, they certainly will start using other drugs, but they don't learn as quickly as, say, a clinical trial that comes out. So we have this huge lag between knowledge that we acquire and the time it gets into practice. So we do want to get feedback from the clinicians back to the system, but we also want to understand when the clinicians themselves might have some errors in their decision process. So this is a very complex way of thinking about the use of AI. So finally, everything I've shown you to this point has shown that the data on the left-hand side, on your left side, right, is actually static, right? The data is not static, right? Data is continuously growing. New data is coming in from the population, these data sets. So how do we build the models to be continuously learning? The next thing is, if we're giving feedback to the system, how do we incorporate the feedback into the system, right? So if we have very rich AI systems, then we need abilities to capture what's happening at the point of care. And it needs to be so simple that it's not someone continuously tapping on an interface. We need to think about how we can capture information through voice, through video, and other mechanisms. And we need to be able to incorporate that information as well into our data collection. So now we're thinking about continuously learning systems, which are interactive, which are giving information back to patients and physicians in real time, and we're able to detect how well they're doing. Trying to evaluate all this is where the complexity of the stuff I do comes in. Trying to think of study designs that will ensure that this information is accurately collected, and that the results of that research is able to inform the next generation of what we're doing. There's some very tricky issues on the regulatory side, and we've been working with the FDA. When you create a learning system like this, it's not a static piece of code that we can give to the FDA and say, hey, here, please inspect this and say, this is the code we have. This code and the knowledge that's required will continue to learn over time. And how do you validate such a system as being safe and ethical in that setting? So this is some of the challenges we're going to go from sort of thinking about this black box where physicians and nurses are reacting to the knowledge we provide them from the machine learning side to creating a system where everyone's kind of learning at the same time. Now, one of the things that we are also tackling as part of this is thinking about how we can keep the provenance of this data. So through something we call blockchain, which for IBM we're working on the Linux open source model called Hyperledger, and we're thinking about how we can allow patients to have control over this information as part of the system. So we have provenance over the information, that we know that the data came from certain sources, like for example, the patient consented to sharing information from their home IoT that went into the Hyperledger, which is the blockchain, and we know we know the source of information, and as more data comes in from hospitals, from genomics and so forth, then that patient has control of information that they about themselves, and they can permission physicians, researchers, other parties to be able to access that data. And then when they're done consenting, they can remove that consent. Right now, the way we have data, it's either siloed and no one can get access to the data, so we have a problem there. And then once data leaves the patient's hands and from their devices that they share, there's no way to determine how that data is being used, reused going forward. So we're very interested in taking blockchain and applying it as a foundation for this process of evaluating the source of data and sharing the source of the data. And the next generation, I think, of blockchain will actually take the analytics we're using and put that onto the blockchain so that we have provenance about how the knowledge that we're deriving, what data was being used, what model was applied, will be put on blockchain. And that will also allow us then to address some of these medical legal issues. So I'm going to end there. So a quick overview of what we're doing in AI for healthcare and what the team here is doing. And I'm open to a few questions before we have our next speaker. Yes?
Sure. So you mentioned you want data back from physicians about whether or not these models are working.
Mm-hmm.
What if they have their own biases? And that data they give you back is biased. How do you deal with that?
That's the one of the challenges I was posing to that. So you can think of different solutions to that situation, right? We can look at a physician's practice patterns, for example, and determine if there are some of these cognitive biases. And people who work in the area of behavioral economics, which received the Nobel Prize this year as the topic area for in economics, know that people are not logical decision makers, that they create errors and do all sorts of issues. So we can actually look at someone's behavior as a way to model if these things exist. The way that physicians practices, for example, if they're practicing with medications that were out in the market 10 years ago versus medications that are more current, as a way of modeling that and understanding that. That's one issue. The other issue is that we don't know, that since there's some uncertainty of diagnosis and prognosis and so forth, when we get feedback, we don't want to get feedback from a single user, right? We want to get feedback from multiple users into the system. Then how do we decide to incorporate where there are levels of uncertainty among the experts, so to say, versus what the system is saying, right? So normally when we do our work in AI, we do a concordance study. We say, okay, here's what the system said for this set of cases, and here's what the physician said, or a multi-set of physicians say. But when we're having interaction between the two, we can't just use a simple concordance model. We have to determine how both systems are working together. So the best way I can think of that from an evaluation perspective is to think that the physician's performing at a certain level in terms of how well they're doing. We want the system to perform better when we add the AI. So not that the AI and the physician have to act at the same level of expertise, but together they actually do better.
So can the system provide counter feedback to the physician's feedback? So for instance, if the physician said, no, I think we should use this other drug, the one that I'm biased towards, could the system then come back and say, well, recent medical studies suggest we should use this drug, that kind of thing?
Yeah, so this is really part of the interaction. We're thinking about the next level of how smart systems actually engage and even debate people, right? Providing counter evidence what they're doing. And part of that is this going beyond saying the physician said yes, no to this is the right answer, but telling us what the reasoning is. So if they tell us a reason and that this is not the right answer because this is not the same class of diagnoses that they're looking at, then that gives us more information, and we can counter-argue that potentially at a higher level. So we really need the systems to be able to reason about what they're doing and how they're doing it. So that's open to the physician to interpret. Okay. Any other questions? Or otherwise we'll switch over. Thank you very much for your attention. Please listen up there.